When you think of American history, certain states immediately come to mind. Massachusetts for the Revolution, Pennsylvania for independence, Virginia for the Founding Fathers. But there's one state whose story embodies the raw, unfiltered spirit of America in a way few others can claim. A state born from rebellion, forged in civil war, and built on the backs of the bravest workers America has ever known. This is the story of West Virginia. It's a story of mountains that held unimaginable wealth beneath their ancient peaks, of people who risked everything for the right to chart their own course, of miners who descended into darkness every day to power a nation. This is a story of coal, courage, and independence. Today, we're diving deep into the history of the Mountain State, exploring how a region once dismissed as backwoods and backwards became one of the most pivotal players in American industrial might, and how its people fought not one, but countless battles for dignity, safety, and the right to be free. So let's journey back to where it all began to understand how West Virginia became what it is today. Before there was West Virginia, there was simply Virginia, one of the original 13 colonies and the largest. But the western part of Virginia was always different. While the eastern Tidewater region grew wealthy on tobacco plantations worked by enslaved people, the western mountains told a different story entirely. The Appalachian Mountains weren't just a geographic feature, they were a barrier, a dividing line between two fundamentally different worlds. East of the mountains, you had plantation culture, slaveholding aristocrats, and political power concentrated in Richmond. West of the mountains, you had small farmers, rugged individualists, and people who worked their own land with their own hands. The people who settled Western Virginia in the 1700s and early 1800s were Scots-Irish, German, and English immigrants looking for land and opportunity. These weren't wealthy planters. They were subsistence farmers who cleared rocky hillsides, hunted in dense forests, and built communities in the isolated mountain valleys. They didn't own slaves because they couldn't afford them. And frankly, the mountainous terrain wasn't suited for plantation agriculture anyway. This created a cultural and economic divide that grew wider with each passing decade. Western Virginians felt ignored by the state government in Richmond. Their roads were terrible. Their schools were underfunded. They had little representation in the state legislature despite their growing population. The Eastern elites controlled Virginia politics, and they showed little interest in developing the Western counties. By the mid-80s, resentment was boiling over. Western Virginians had held conventions demanding reform, better representation, and infrastructure investment, but Richmond largely ignored these pleas. The stage was set for a dramatic split, but it would take a national crisis to finally break Virginia in two. The mountains of West Virginia had always been beautiful, but in the late 1800s, people discovered they were also unbelievably wealthy. Beneath those ancient peaks lay some of the richest coal deposits in the world. Coal had been known about for decades, but it wasn't until after the Civil War that technology and demand aligned to make coal mining a massive industry. America was industrializing at breakneck speed. Railroads needed coal, steel mills needed coal, cities needed coal for heating, and West Virginia sat on an almost inexhaustible supply. The railroads came first. Companies like the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad and the Norfolk and Western Railway pushed into the mountains, and where the railroads went, The coal companies followed. Towns sprang up overnight in remote hollows that had known only scattered farms. The transformation was stunning and total. But here's where the story gets complicated and where we need to talk about what coal mining really meant for the people of West Virginia. The coal companies didn't just mine coal, they owned everything. They owned the land, the houses, the stores, sometimes even the churches and schools. Miners often lived in company towns where they were paid in company scrip, a form of currency that could only be spent at company stores. Prices at these stores were inflated, keeping miners in perpetual debt to their employers. The famous line from the song 16 Tons captured it perfectly. I owe my soul to the company store. This wasn't poetic exaggeration. It was reality for thousands of families. The work itself was beyond dangerous. Miners descended into narrow, unstable tunnels carved into mountainsides. They worked by lamplight, breathing coal dust that would eventually destroy their lungs. Cave ins, explosions, and floods were constant threats. In the early days of coal mining, safety regulations were virtually non existent. Miners were expendable. If one died, there were always more desperate men willing to take his place. Between 1890 and 1920, thousands of West Virginia miners died in mine accidents. The Monongahs mining disaster of 1907 killed 362 men and boys, making it the worst mining disaster in American history. The explosion was so powerful it could be heard for miles. Entire communities were devastated. Widows and orphans were left with nothing, often evicted from company housing within days. But here's what you need to understand. Despite the danger, despite the exploitation, despite the deaths, coal mining also represented opportunity for thousands of families. Immigrants from Italy, Poland, Hungary, and dozens of other countries came to West Virginia for mining jobs. African Americans fleeing the Jim Crow South found work in the mines. While the work was brutal, it paid better than subsistence farming, and the mines were, in some cases, more racially integrated than many other American workplaces of that era. This created a unique culture. Mining communities were tight knit. Men who worked together underground developed bonds of trust and brotherhood because their lives literally depended on each other. Families supported each other through tragedies. Music, storytelling, and faith became central to community life. But the exploitation couldn't continue forever. The courage that had created West Virginia was about to manifest again, this time in one of the most dramatic labor conflicts in American history. The early 1900s saw West Virginia transform into a battleground, and I mean that literally. The conflict between coal miners seeking to unionize and the coal companies determined to stop them escalated into actual armed warfare. The United Mine Workers of America had been trying to organize West Virginia miners for years, but the coal companies fought back with every tool at their disposal. They hired private security forces, most notoriously the Baldwin Felts Detective Agency, who acted as corporate armies. These agents evicted Union supporters from their homes, intimidated workers, and weren't shy about using violence. Tensions exploded in 1920 in the town of Matawan. When Baldwin Felts agents arrived to evict miners' families, the town's police chief Sid Hatfield, confronted the two. Hatfield was a local hero, a man who stood with the miners against the coal companies. The confrontation turned into a shootout that left 10 people dead, including 7 Baldwin Felts agents. The Matwan Massacre, as it became known, was just the beginning. In 19 the conflict reached its peak with the Battle of Blair Mountain, the largest armed uprising in America since the Civil War. On one side, you had approximately 10,000 armed coal miners marching to free imprisoned Union members and to support miners in Logan and Mingo counties. On the other side, you had coal company forces, local police, and eventually federal troops. For 5 days, fighting raged across the mountains of southern West Virginia. Miners and company forces exchanged gunfire across ridge lines. The Army dropped bombs from airplanes. The first time aerial bombing it was used against American civilians on American soil. Somewhere between 50 and 100 people died, though the exact number may never be known. The miners were ultimately defeated, forced to surrender to federal troops. Many were arrested, and the Union movement in West Virginia was crushed for years. But the courage they showed, the willingness to literally go to war for better working conditions, for the right to organize, for basic human dignity, that became part of West Virginia's identity. The mine wars showed the world what West Virginians had always known. These were people who would fight for what was right, no matter the cost. The decades following the mine wars saw coal continue to dominate West Virginia's economy, but the relationship between miners, companies, and communities slowly evolved. The New Deal of the 1930s brought new labor protections. World War created massive demand for coal, bringing prosperity to mining regions. The United Mine Workers, under leader John L. Lewis, finally succeeded in unionizing most of West Virginia's mines, bringing better wages, safer conditions, and benefits to miners. The 1940s and 1950s were, in many ways, the golden age of coal in West Virginia. Mining towns bustled with activity. Main streets were lined with shops, theaters, and restaurants. Miners could earn a solid, middle-class living. Children could expect to do better than their parents. The American dream, powered by coal, seemed real and attainable. But this prosperity contained the seeds of its own decline. In the 1950s and 60s, coal companies began mechanizing. Machines could do the work of dozens of miners, cutting coal faster and cheaper than ever before. But those machines also eliminated jobs, thousands and thousands of jobs. Mining employment in West Virginia peaked in the 1940s and has declined almost every decade since. Towns that had thrived for generations withered. Young people left for opportunities elsewhere. The boom and bust cycle that had always characterized coal country accelerated. When coal prices were high, communities hung on. When prices fell, devastation followed. Environmental concerns also mounted. Decades of coal mining had scarred the landscape. Streams ran orange with acid mine drainage. Mountaintop removal mining, which became common in the late 20th century, literally reshaped the geography of West Virginia, blasting away mountain peaks to reach coal seams and filling valleys with waste rock. The practice was efficient and profitable, but it destroyed ecosystems, buried streams, and left moonscapes where forests had stood for millions of years. Communities near these operations faced contaminated water, increased flooding, and health problems from coal dust and chemical exposure. By the early 21st century, West Virginia faced an identity crisis. Coal had made the state, but it had also trapped it in a cycle of dependence. The industry that had powered America couldn't even power sustainable prosperity in its own backyard. So, where does that leave West Virginia today? It's complicated, like most honest answers about real places with real people. The coal industry continues to decline, not primarily because of environmental regulations, as some claim, but because of market forces. Natural gas, obtained through fracking, has become cheaper. Renewable energy is growing. The world is slowly, haltingly, moving away from coal. West Virginia produced over 150 million tons of coal in 1997. By 2020, that had fallen to around 90 million tons. This has left many communities struggling. West Virginia ranks near the bottom in measures of economic prosperity, educational attainment, and health outcomes. The opioid epidemic has hit particularly hard, devastating families and communities already strained by economic decline. Population loss continues as young people seek opportunities elsewhere. But here's what often gets lost in narratives about West Virginia: the people. The same courage and independence that created this state still runs through its communities. Teachers in West Virginia made national news in 2018 when they went on strike for better pay and benefits, inspiring a wave of teacher strikes across the nation. Entrepreneurs are working to diversify the economy, developing tourism, technology, and craft industries. Environmental advocates, many themselves from coal families, are working to remediate mining damage and to build a sustainable future. The state's natural beauty remains stunning. The New River Gorge, recently designated as a national park, draws visitors from around the world. The mountains that once isolated West Virginia now attract hikers, climbers, and outdoor enthusiasts. The state's music, storytelling, and cultural traditions continue to thrive. West Virginia is not a museum piece or a cautionary tale. It's a living place with real people navigating real challenges, just as their ancestors did. The history of West Virginia is a uniquely American story, one that doesn't fit neatly into simple narratives of progress or decline. It's a story of people who demanded the right to determine their own fate, even when that meant breaking away from the state that had ignored them. It's a story of workers who powered American industry, quite literally, keeping the lights on and the factories running, often at tremendous personal cost. It's a story of courage in the face of exploitation, of communities that stood together through disasters and hardships that would have broken lesser places. It's a story of independence, sometimes to a fault, of people who would rather struggle on their own terms than prosper under someone else's control. The coal that brought both prosperity and problems to West Virginia is finite. The seams will run out eventually, or the world will move on to other energy sources. But the character forged in these mountains, the resilience of West Virginia's people, those are renewable resources. West Virginia's future may not look like its past, but if history is any guide, West Virginians will face that future with the same stubborn courage they've always shown. They'll fight for their communities, they'll support each other through hard times, and they'll refuse to let anyone write them off. Because that's what West Virginians have always done. That's the story of coal, courage, and independence. That's the story of West Virginia. If you enjoyed this deep dive into West Virginia history, please hit that like button and subscribe for more explorations of American history. Drop a comment below if you have connections to West Virginia or if there are other state histories you'd like us to cover. And remember, history isn't just about dates and events. It's about people, their struggles, their triumphs, and the legacies they leave behind. West Virginia's legacy is one of courage in the face of tremendous odds. And that's a lesson that resonates far beyond its borders. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.